Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Cocoron. In the last part, we reached the middle third of the game where we have to explore looking around for Princess Rua, and like I mentioned last part, she's always in the exact same location. She is always between Milk Sea and Fairy Forest, no matter which direction you go to. With that said, I should note, if you're trying to use this opportunity to level up your character, I'd recommend going other directions, as the moment you reach the midpoint where the giant egg is, you move on towards the end game. That is your last chance to power things up. While the enemies in the endgame can also drop eggs that power stuff up, you're limited on what you can get in that regard. And there she is. You don't even need to shoot the egg in this timeline, I think. Thank you, Arn. I've been held by the wizard Tapir for such a long time. Tapir, who created this dream world, is really Baku, the Dream Eater. Tapir has kidnapped your friends and escaped. The strength of your imagination has made this world his favorite food. If nothing is done, in the end, everyone will be eaten. Arn, please defeat Tapir for our sakes, as well as your own. So it turns out a guy who helped us make our characters is the villain, and you're immediately thrown into the endgame marathon with the character you're playing as last. So in this regard, I could honestly recommend making the character you rescue Princess Rua whoever you think your best character is. In my case, it would probably be Lark, or whoever I have, usually that's a bird or a shuriken. With that said, you're not entirely screwed out of choosing them for reasons we'll get over in a moment. The start of this stage is pretty simple, though. It's just a straightforward platforming section with a lot of enemies rushing at you. Again, a good opportunity to get some good power-ups. But because you're now locked on how many enemies there are, powering up your weapons can be a little bit of a task. I think a strategy you can take is using the pandas here to farm their balls infinitely for eggs. Because I think if you off-screen the pandas, the balls come back. But don't quote me on that entirely, because I seldom farm at this point. Because usually, I'm comfortable enough with whoever I have that I can get through the rest of the game no problem. Now, from whoever you enter this stage with, I'm not entirely certain of how it decides how you unlock your characters. I think it's just going down the list from top to bottom, maybe? Either way, you really want to make sure you have a bird or jet type character really early on in your character list, because it's going to be your best bet at surviving the hardest part of the game later on in this stage. And I should note, this stage is a bit of a marathon. No matter how far you are into the stage in its various sections, even at the boss fight maybe, I believe. Maybe not the boss fight now I think about it. You're thrown all the way back here, I believe. Which is rough, and they really should have given you better checkpointing. The ending here is easily the biggest difficulty spike in the game, and it's kind of shocking because otherwise, barring maybe the Cloud and Skunk platforming, towards the end of the Starset Hill sections, or the beginning of them in some cases, the game's not that hard. So right here, I unlocked Lark. This is a good thing because that means I have a flyer for the next stage section. So the way this stage is structured is that after every section, you rescue one of your various characters, and then you can choose them. Okay, but looks, yeah, it starts at the top of the list and then goes down. Because of this, I'd recommend starting with an earlier character. Oh, actually, no, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here. This section isn't too bad. This is the other section in the game where having a boat-type character can be pretty useful because of the cactuses we see there at the bottom. Those are going to be a recurrent hazard through most of this stage because they do a metric shitload of damage. To the point where I think if your character has less than 10 health, they might be instant kill or close enough to it that they might as well be. Having a flyer here really helps because you can just completely nullify a lot of the platforming in this section. With that said, it's the next section that you're really going to want a flyer or a jet for, because it's easily the hardest platforming section in the game. If I were to compare it, imagine if there's just a random section out of nowhere that can be about as deadly as the force beam falling section in Quickman stage in Mega Man 2. Not quite instant kill like that section is, but about as dangerous. I'm also not a fan of this section of the game because they kind of throw enemies at you in a semi-random fashion. Like, they're all in the set location, yeah, but they're all enemies from earlier on in the game. And if they're things like the turtles, they can kind of come out of nowhere. And it's very much like there's various types of these enemies throughout Mega Man. Just the ones that hide in the pits and only jump out right when you're about to jump over the pit, and thus can easily surprise you. Alright, so it's the next section of stage that is the absolute nightmare. Because what we're going to have going on in this section, again, I recommend having either a bird or a jet type body character for this. This is partially why I made Lark and Geem my first characters in the game. We got a bunch of cactuses and flowers that open up. The flowers are your platforms. They open somewhat randomly, but somewhat in a pattern as well, going along in a chain. You need to time your jumps carefully enough to get around this. If you don't have a flyer, you're constantly falling on top of cactuses. That really hurts. It sucks. With that said, I should note, a minor thing that the game doesn't exactly tell you is that, or I guess it does a bad job of showing you at least, when you're on top of a flower platform, it doesn't close. So you do have more time than you'd think just waiting around for the flowers to open up. With that said, the jumps are also very specific and very tight. This game's control being sharp enough to let you feel like you're in control, but loose enough that there's still some, oh god, am I gonna make this? If you don't have a jet or bird type body, makes that section a complete nightmare. From here on, the stage isn't too bad. There's still a couple of sections that are kind of tight jumps to avoid getting hit. But I'd say we're past the worst of it. Again, though, if you die, you're sent back to the beginning. This is another section where having a boat can come in handy, so I'll give the game this. Boats are more handy than tanks in terms of their special ability, because you could just completely bypass a lot of the challenge in this section. But boats are so limited otherwise that I just don't feel they're worth it. It is, in that regard, a problem with Cocoron, in that for a platformer, having to have hindsight on repeat playthroughs to better enjoy certain stages or use certain character abilities, it has to be done a very certain way to be satisfying. And that's not exactly reserved for platformers. Like, RPGs, what comes to mind is Shin Megami Tensei, survival horror comes to mind like Resident Evil. When you die in those games and lose progress to a boss fight or a puzzle hunt and just getting killed by like liquor all of a sudden in Resident Evil, you now have the hindsight of what a better route could be in that game to better use your abilities or your items. And in Shin Megami Tensei, maybe you die to a boss, but you understand their attacks now, so you can now plan around those by changing your weaknesses or changing your demons around to have better affinities for those boss fights. For a game like Cocoron, where it only really comes into play in the stages and very little as it is anyway, it does feel lackluster. With that said, we are now moving on to the final section of the stage, which is probably the easiest portion of the stage, because we got a lot of repeat enemies. I do kind of wish we had more original enemies here in the endgame, and we do have some more original ones still coming up for the proper endgame level, because there's one more level after this. I'm very torn on how a game should handle a journey thus far type of stage, because sometimes they work out, sometimes it doesn't. It honestly depends on what game did it and what that game's mechanics are. Like, say, an action game like a Devil May Cry or something, where they throw every enemy type in the game at you, and part of the game's puzzle was figuring out how best to deal with them, like what their weaknesses are. Say, in Devil May Cry, you can jump on the, I forget the names of the enemies, but the ghosts with the scissors, with the shotguns, and then just instant kill them. And throwing those in with a lot of other enemies, you could then figure out a better route to take care of them by taking care of those enemies first, or things like that. For a game like this, or a Mega Man, there's not really a way you could do that easily outside of, well, now you have all these special weapons, use them. Although, at the same time, it does also feel a bit like a victory lap, which is an important thing, I feel, to put in a game all the same. With that said, with the final character rescued, we're now going on to the boss fight of this stage, and for either of the final bosses, you're going to want weapons that have a good amount of vertical reach, like the Shuriken when it's fully powered up. The pencil is pretty good for that, because I can go straight above you really quickly. Avoid things like the flower in my experience, despite having a really good lob arc, because it's time for us to fight Baku! It's been such a long time since I've had such a delicious dream. Alright, Baku's pretty straightforward. He flies all over the place, dropping eggs, and if you hit him, he does his little spin that we've seen throughout the game and fires 3 eggs out below him and then diagonally from in either direction downwards. If you can get on the same altitude as him, you can kind of get a good stun lock going on because he'll be far enough away that he doesn't hit at you with his reaction attack, but he won't get to drop his bouncing eggs, meaning you can take him down pretty quickly. And that's that stage. I am Cocoron. Thank you for saving me, but it's not enough. If Tapir's not defeated soon, we'll all be eaten along with the dream world. Because somehow, I guess we didn't take care of him there, we gotta go through one last stage. Again, choose whoever you feel is best. I would generally go with one of the flyers, but if you have a good flower user, that's a good thing to bring in too, because, again, you want things that have good vertical reach here. And now we have the exact same tile set as the last section of the last level. With that said, this level is easily one of the longest levels in the game. And also, in some regards, non-Euclidean, because I think it loops into itself a couple of times if I'm recalling how the stage design generally works out. With that said, like the entirety of the marathon that was the last stage, if you count each of the subsections where you gain one of your allies back as a one stage, you're going to be seeing a lot of familiar enemies here. There's going to be a couple of new ones, but at this point, you can deal with them no problem if you have a fully powered-up shuriken, or really any fully powered-up weapon. The dancing tapir cheerleaders are probably one of the more annoying ones just because they can jump pretty quickly. And they also have some of the highest health a normal enemy has in the game, but if you're smart about using flyers, you can take them out before they have a chance to react. I do find it interesting that they decided to make who appeared to be your ally the villain of the game like this, because that's a relatively, I don't want to say modern video game idea, but that's something that a lot of modern games use to very good effect compared to what they would do back then. Like, the only other game I can think of that did something exactly like that back when, in some regards, is Final Fantasy II with what they do with Leon. But otherwise, there's not many that come to mind out of the major releases. Usually, if the games had story, there was a very prescribed villain from the start. Not really much of a plot twist thing. It's funny, though, because I brought it up with some people I know recently, kind of also played the game. I feel like this game not only could use like a modern spiritual successor for this type of concept, the platform where you get to build your own character and maybe build levels better around certain ability sets, but also I really feel like this game could have done well with like an OVA, because in some regards it's kind of similar in tone and also having an NES game to Captain Nemo, looking back. With that said, we're about to hit onto the final boss, but there's no real preparations you can do, so just head in and hope you can beat it. Welcome, Lark. But this is the end of your dream. Why, you ask? Because I'm gonna eat this dream! The final boss against Baku is the first boss we fought, but now when you hit him, he fires 5 eggs, covering the entire semicircle on the lower half of the screen below him. So in that regard, hitting him can be a bit harder because you need to space yourself a little easier, because you can't exactly just stay on the same altitude as him halfway across the screen and get away scot-free. And I think he's a little more direct. Yeah, he also fires the direct eggs that you need to be a bit more on your feet anyway. But if you bring in something with a good amount of health or good reach, the boss fight will go down pretty quickly. It's still relatively easy. Kind of weird that the hardest boss in the game was just a random boss fight on one of the stages and not the final boss, but oh well. Also a little disappointing we don't get a unique final boss theme, but oh well. He's done. Thank God only the HUD will flash there, because that would have been bad seizure warning. Ugh. That's game. Thank you. If we put him in the egg, it'll keep him quiet for now. People in the dream will be delighted. Oh, come on an adventure with us so that the dream can continue for a much happier world. that's Cocoron. It's a cute little game on the NES that we never got here stateside, but I think it's worth a try. It's got some cool ideas with the character creator, it's got some cute graphics, the music's pretty catchy, but it's ultimately a very short and uneventful game because there's nothing really here that stands out from its competition at the time. Like apparently, like I brought up in like part 1, this game's direct competition was Mega Man 3, and if I were to tell you to play one of those two games, despite me not liking the Doc Robot section, it would be Mega Man 3. And in some ways, that's a shame because I think there's a lot here that could be really cool, but they just don't do enough unique with the stages or the abilities for it to be really worth it using a lot of them in that regard. Like, you could just use, like, 2 particular weapons, 2 body types, and you can clear a lot of the game no problem. There's a lot cool here. I think you could do a lot with this nowadays, and there are some games that have tried to do the build your own character thing to an extent, but not quite like this. Usually it's a roguelike, here's what you get for this build, and here's what you can do for this run sort of thing. Hades comes to mind in that regard. But there could be a game like this nowadays, and I think it would do real well in the indie scene. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching. Have a great night. Take care. And I'll see you guys next Let's Play, whatever that may be. I think I remember what it is from the footage recording order, but we'll see what it is. See you guys then.